44, 12, 91, 3. Broadcast. I'm a guide on a ghost tour.
I am a guide on a ghost tour. We have some strange rules. By Faceless Sphinx.
Hey there, I'm Tom. You're Jack's kid, right? Fantastic. I'm so happy to meet you. Congratulations on that scholarship. Glad you're going to be working with us while you're here. Your dad was a dear, dear friend to me. It's a bit weird, if you don't mind me saying it, talking to the 20-something-year-old child of something and somebody I always seem to remember being the same age. Unreal. Makes me feel a bit old. What's that? Oh, that's kind of you to say, kid, I know. Just a number, but you know how it is. Anyway, here we are, King James, Florida in all of its glory. Interesting little place, isn't it? I think your being in college here and working for the company will work out well for you. Fun job, plenty of time for a social life, good pay. And if you decide to keep at it, the boss is very good about hiring on these seasonal guides as full-time employees, whilst they're trying to figure out the rest of their lives. Me? Well, I was a few years out of uni when I started working here, to be honest. I found myself out with the Royal Marines earlier than I expected, and I was looking for something different, something good for my elf. Thought this would be just a temporary thing. Turns out it was more than temporary. I love this job. Love the people I meet. Love the stories I get to tell. Hopefully you will too. That's how I met your dad, actually. Two of us got on very well. He was finishing up a master's in something he hated. What was it? Can't remember. Oh yeah, business administration. Ghastly, mate. Your father truly hated that. I know your granddad forced that on him. I know your dad always wanted to be a marine biologist. I'm glad he finally got to that field. Before the end. You know, if you don't mind my saying, you look a lot like him. You favour his eyes, I think. I've no doubt you'll make him proud. And by the way, as I wrote to your mother, yeah, I wrote to her, pen and paper and everything. I don't do social media these days. I'm terribly sorry I wasn't able to make the funeral. If it was even remotely possible, I would have gone. On that note, please don't let me intrude, but if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here. I've lost my own parents and a wife and a child, you know, so I know what it's like. I know it's different for everyone, but... What's that? Oh, yeah, it's true, unfortunately. I know I don't look old enough, but trust me when I tell you, I am. Anyway, they give me his family, alright? I'm here if you need anything. Good? Good. I won't pressure you too much on that, but I'm here. So on to business. Fortunately, it's a very good one to be involved in. This is Colonel Gregory's Old Town Ghost Tour Company. We've been running tours since 1930 or so. People started coming here on vacation just after the crash because the more popular places were getting expensive and cars were becoming more common. Even when the real boom in Florida tourism came later, King James was popular with a certain type of tourist, the casual kind. The kind that wanted to touch a bit of history, you know, and relax by the ocean, smell the salt water in the air. Not really party people, but this isn't really a very party-heavy town, I'm sorry to say, if you're into that. If you aren't, well, good for you. Now me, I love the ocean. I can't tolerate it anywhere I can't smell the ocean on the breeze. I can't imagine anywhere else to be rather than here. It's, I've got to say it's unfortunate that the short-sighted politics of this state makes some people feel unsafe. It's hurt the economy, hurt the ecology, mostly hurt the people. But you'll be happy to know that there aren't many of that type here. You know what I mean, the ones that wear certain hats and shirts and carry intolerance like it's a matter of national pride. It's a safe, fairly progressive town here. You'll be okay. People will look out for you here. Anyway, the best way I reckon to train you is to take you on a tour, yeah? The same tour you'll be giving eventually yourself. Come with me this evening and I'll show you some of the hot spots, give you a few tips and explore the rules for how we do things around here. We'll even buy you a good dinner when we're finished, if you'll permit me. Want to get started? Right. So our first stop is up the road, north, just a block or so. Nothing too challenging, I assure you. Where to start? Yeah, so let's start with King James. So, first, King James is technically a city, too big to be a town and too small to be a major metropolis. My hometown is just like that, so I get it. Of course, you know about the university, and we have a few neighborhoods, our own police and fire departments, an exceptionally good library system, some great restaurants, 3 churches, a synagogue, and a mosque, with some of the best, cleanest beaches on the Atlantic coast. People say there's good fishing here too. Now, I'm not much of a fisherman myself, but apparently it's quite good. There are at least 2 major wrecks offshore, one of them yet undiscovered, and there's very pleasant weather here most of the year. Not a bad place to live, actually. The ghost tours were created to, to make money, sure, but also because the founder, a lady called Aggie, who was the great-grandmother of the current owner, that's Ben, had a genuine love for this little city and its history. King James, you see, is old by American standards. Very old. It's not the oldest continually inhabited settlement in the United States. That's St. Augustine up the coast about an hour. However, it is among the oldest. The first permanent settlements were here in 1701 or so. The Spanish were amazed to find that none of the Native Americans in the area had settled it. Sheltered cove, comfortable weather, most of the year, abundant fish and fruit trees. There was the swamp, but that's far enough away that the water is clean enough and the yellow fever distant enough that it's not a constant threat. Doesn't make us immune, but it is livable, with the right conditions. So why didn't the Native Americans settle here? I don't know. I've spoken to some of the indigenous folks here in Florida, and they deny the folk tales that it was somehow cursed. Instead, they suggested that it may simply have been one of those areas of natural land that hadn't been settled yet. And that makes a lot more sense to me. Anyhow, the Spanish settled it, mostly in Anchorage until 1720, when the Spanish gave a land grant to a group of Jacobites, Scots, Irish, and a very small number of English and Welsh, who were fleeing persecution. Fun fact, some of those were freedmen, and those freedmen were men of colour. Don't think too idealistically of this town, though. The first settlers didn't have any interest in owning slaves. I mean, the worst of the lot were coming from a status that was little better than slavery. But this is the North American South, and the slave owners came. There were never as many as there were in St. Augustine, but they were here. There wasn't even a formal slave market here, but again, they were here. I'm sorry to say they were here fairly early on. You can find slaves and freedmen alike buried in all of the cemeteries here. Contrary to what some of the preachers on telly say, King James was named not for the Bible, nor King James who had his version translated, but for James II and his son, the Old Pretender. You're an history major, right? So I won't bore you too much with the details of that unfortunate period of British history. You probably know them for that matter. We're getting closer to our first stop. Do you see the cemetery to your left? That's the Huguenot Cemetery. It's the second oldest of the surviving cemeteries in the city, not counting the churchyards, of course. More on that later, but here we are. This is the first stop. It's where you'll gather your band of tourists before you begin each of your tours. We tend to give it to the new folks first because it's a good one to start with. Popular, convenient to the parking lot and the bus stop, low traffic on the road even in our tourist season, easy walk initially. Good tips for this one too. Good pocket money. Before we go on, I want to explain something. It'll help you grok the rest of the night. We have a good man in Ben, our boss. Decent guy. Fair. Believes in paying his workers well and treating them like people, not beasts of labour. Medical coverage, time off. Medical coverage isn't great, but it is coverage and he pays for the coverage he can afford. Not common in this line of work at all, I can tell you. Anyhow, the reason I bring that up is this. Our boss he's a genuinely good guy. He has very few rules for the employees. Don't drink or smoke on shift. Be as polite as you can. Show up for your shift at least 15 minutes early and give him as much warning as you can if you won't be able to make it. You find he'll usually be very understanding about that. If the weather is bad, remember it is Florida and it rains virtually every day here. Some of the tours will get cancelled. If that happens, either he'll call you or I will. Speaking of which, I advise you to carry your cell phone with you when you're on the clock. Keep it charged, bring an extra charger. Some of the sites, well yeah, you know there's that stereotypical thing about haunted places draining batteries? It happens, more than you'd think. Now, I'm not much for pseudoscience, so whether that's down to the supernatural, bad signal, or electromagnetic fields, I couldn't tell you. But it does happen, so better to be ahead of it. If there are any problems at all, call the number on the back of that ID card they gave you. The one you should always have in your wallet, by the way. Free hint. I don't care what the emergency is, mate. Customer gets a bit creepy, you spot a fire. Great Cthulhu himself manifests looking to borrow your lip balm. You call, okay? Somebody will always be there to pick it up. Always. You are safe here. Take advantage of that. So that's that. Those are the technical bits. Now for the more sort of serious stuff, I suppose. You see, there are rules beyond those things I've just given you, beyond the things in your contract. Another set of rules beyond the guidelines. And because you want to ensure your safety, and because we want to do that, you're absolutely expected to follow them, every one of them, to the letter. I'm quite serious, mate. I know something about following orders, and these are straight from the top. No matter how silly these rules sound, you have to follow them. If you don't, well, assuming we find out, you might get a warning, especially if it's an accident, but beyond that, you're fired. One strike, you're out. Yes, I see the look on your face, my young friend. Believe me when I say Ben really is a good man. It isn't about him being a martinet. We fire people who don't follow the rules because they tend to get themselves and their tour groups hurt. The boss doesn't want that on his conscience, and frankly, none of your fellow tour guides do either. Okay, enough. You get it. No lecture from me. Just take my advice, alright? Please follow the rules. So, here's an unofficial one to begin with. It's a good one. Do you see the bronze statue of that dog there on the corner? The little Boston Terrier? Gods, I love me a good bully. That's what he is, Boston Terrier. Look at that sweet bully face. That, my friend, is Little Jim. Little Jim is very well respected here in King James. All of us feel the same. Give him a pat when you see him on your first ship. Say, hello, pal, hello, Jim, whatever. Started the tradition with Aggie herself, actually, and it's continued all this time. Good luck, they say. Keeps you grounded, if nothing else. So Little Jim was a local, well, vagrant sounds indecent for a good boy like him. He was a local stray. They say he jumped off of a French schooner one day in the 1890s and decided to stay. Lots of people tried to adopt him, bring him in, and give him a home, but he never stayed any place long. He was sort of everyone's dog, I suppose. Sometimes he'd sleep far up the road at the old Addison house, and that's quite a ways by foot. Other times he'd sleep in the rectory with the pastor at St. Gregory or St. Alexander. During the day, he'd keep watch at the elementary school, wander onto campus. There are stories about Little Jim, stories about him chasing away snakes and frightening criminals, warning families about burglars. Used to walk some of the smaller kids to school. Everybody loved Little Jim, and Little Jim was very well cared for. Now, on August 9th, 1898, at around 3 a.m., Little Jim suddenly got up from where he was sleeping with the Nelson family at the time. Jim barked and yelped at Mr. Nelson. Nelson thought he wanted out, but when he opened the door, Jim kept barking. Mr. Nelson could tell there was something wrong, and he followed Jim as he went running toward the waterfront. Turns out the pier was on fire. Nelson tried to fight the fire, and Jim went running, waking up everybody he could. By the time he was finished, he'd woken up a very large section of the town. The police and fire chiefs were among them. By the time they arrived, the pier had all but burned down, but they were able to get it under control before it could harm anyone else. Mr. Nelson was fine. No one was seriously injured. Jim, he saved many, many lives that night. Everybody loved him, called him a hero. Well, unfortunately, Little Jim developed cancer not long after, and he died. 9. 9's very young for a Boston Terrier. People were crushed by it. So, Father Power, the Anglican priest over at St. Gregory, decided that Little Jim should be remembered. He arranged for Jim's little body to be buried in the churchyard, gave a homily asking folks to donate to a monument for Jim, and they did. There it stood since 1899, not far from the waterfront where he led Mr. Nelson on that night. He's worth remembering, I think. So, yeah, that's Little Jim, the hero dog. He deserves a pet, I think, and I always say hello. Hello there, pal. Wish you were here. Oh well, he was a good boy. So they say. Anyhow, that's not an official rule. Sure helps though. Doesn't hurt anyone, right? Let's get started with the official ones. We can do number 1 right now, actually. Now, first, do I have a map for you anywhere? Damn you, Tom, if your head wasn't attached. Ah, here we go. Have a copy. Have a few, actually. Take as many as you need from the office when you go on tour. Always plenty. They don't cost much to print. Now, if you'll do me the favor of opening your map while we're in a place with enough light to see it properly, I want you to look at it closely. Useful little map, isn't it? Very intuitive. Notice the little red arrows. That's the route you'll be taking, absent a special event or something. You'll have it down in no time. Our other major routes are there too. Green, blue, and purple. I usually run the purple one. Now, do you notice something about the others? Well, yeah, blue's the most obvious one. It's an horse instead of an arrow. There are 3 blue tours a night, 2 of them carriage tours, popular with the couples and families. Pain in the arse though. Love horses, not keen on shoveling the shite. But that's not what I'm talking about. See, other than the blue one, the rest are walking tours. We don't offer motor coach tours. No buses, no trams, no shuttles. You need to understand that. We used to offer them way back before the war, but that's long done now. Every so often, your tour group will have somebody, maybe several somebodies, asking where the shuttle bus is or something like that. They may be used to it from a place like St. Augustine. It may not be from previous tour experience. They'll say they've seen him, had him offered by people with tickets and maps on the road. They'll say they've seen him stopping at various points in the city. Listen carefully. Those are not our tour buses. We don't use motor travel for our tours. Period. Nobody else in town does either. If one of your group tries to go aboard one of those shuttles, you turn them away. If you have a suspicion that somebody's taken a tour bus, you call it in immediately. No hesitation. Do it right then. Yeah, the town is safe, and yeah, the people are safe. But buses aren't people, and these ones are not part of this town. So that, my friend, is rule number 1. We do not offer mower tours of any kind. No other tour group in town does. Make sure you remember that. It's very critical your guests know that too. Here, I've got something for you. Bright purple lanyard. Damn near neon. Ugly as sin, I think. Nearly neon puce. Bean picked him because they stand out like a sore thumb and because, yes, they glow in the dark. Attach it to your badge and wear it around your neck, like so. Always wear it on tours. Your tour guests will get wristbands, same color. Everybody in your tour should be wearing a lanyard or a wristband. You on down, for the whole tour. No exceptions. Don't take them off for any reason. That's rule number 2. Everybody on tour wears the lanyard or the wristband. Always. If you see somebody in your tour group who isn't, claiming to be with a tour group, no, they aren't. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they look just like somebody you gave a wristband to. They aren't part of your tour group. Send them away. Why? Aside from freeloading? Well, for example, Mary Woodall, older woman, quite a nice person, usually the guy on the bigger carriage tours, and handles the special Christmas tour. Back in 1982, she was leading a tour group. A guy claiming to be a latecomer showed up halfway through the tour. He apologized profusely, said he was late, gave a detailed explanation about buying his ticket. No wristband. Mary let him tag along. Robbed her tour group blind at the end of the night. He even took Mary's wedding ring, though she says he was very nice about it, whatever that means. Town constables got him within an hour, actually. Terrifying for her and the group, and not common. But it did happen. There are other incidents too. I'll tell you about it as we move on. Let's get stepping, yeah? At the next corner, we turn left and head northwest. This cross street is El Rey. Like I said, it may have been governed by the Spanish, but it was a Scots-Irish town mostly, and they wanted people to know what they fought for, why they were here. They didn't want anyone to forget. Now, given that most of the town is Catholic, always has been, but there are sizable Jewish, Muslim and Protestant communities here. Protestants are mostly what we'd call C of E, or maybe Anglicans where I come from. But here, you'll often call them Episcopalians. The Jewish community is very old, almost as old as the Catholic one. The Muslims are more recent. There's a fantastic Egyptian restaurant just south of where we started. Old Cairo Egyptian. Some of the best food you'll ever eat. I mention religion because we're passing a better view of the Huguenot Cemetery. Not long after the city was officially renamed, the Spanish allowed several French immigrants to come here. They were Protestants, but they were anti-British, and they were willing to pay Spanish taxes, so they came. They came from old Huguenot families, and they established a little colony for themselves. They were nice folks and actually got along pretty well with the Catholics here and the Jews. Unfortunately, they were always a minority in the city. Their families were hit very hard during the Civil War. A lot of them volunteered for one side or the other and never came back. And then when the yellow fever came through here in the late 1880s and the 1890s, it wiped out most of the old families. That happened a lot in Florida before modern medicine. Absolutely tragic. A few years ago, some idiots nearly managed to cause it again too. Vaccines work, mate. Anyhow, I won't get political, but that cemetery is maintained by the descendants and a community. It's well worth your time to visit during the day. During the day. The Huguenot Cemetery, like most of the cemeteries in King James, is open till 8 p.m. and tours are sometimes allowed to go into cemeteries later. But we don't do that. Rule number 3. Never enter the Huguenot Cemetery after dark. If your tour group wants to go in, tell them no. If some of them climb the fence and go in anyway, they usually try that at the end of the evening when they're going to do it. You do whatever you have to keep them out. If they won't listen, call the emergency number immediately. Do not follow them. I repeat, do not follow them. So, around the yellow fever epidemic of 1892, the 4 oldest French families here, very wealthy families, tried to shut themselves off from the sickness and wait it out. Typical story, and in this case not apocryphal. It really happened. Not some Poe story, real life. And some of them, it actually worked. Most of them got sick eventually, as I mentioned before, which is very sad. But some of their deaths had nothing to do with the yellow fever. There was a family here, Cambier. I don't know if that's a traditional Huguenot name, but they'd been here since 1729. They were the wealthiest of the lot. There's a lecture roll at your new uni, Jean Cambier Hall, one of the very first of them. Now this Mr. Cambier, Anton, was an irascible old man. Never raised his hand to his wife or children, to his credit, but he was an irascible old coot nonetheless. Grumpy, very set in his ways, sort of a miser, unpleasant to just about everyone. Now, they say he used to be a very happy man. But then his oldest son went and enlisted in the CS Navy, the Confederate Navy, and he never came back. Mr. Cambier, you understand, was an ardent anti-secessionist, and we suspect a member of the Underground Railroad, so I guess that means he was pleasant to someone. He was deeply disappointed in his son. That son, whose name was David, was one of only 2 children from Mr. Cambier's first marriage. The wife had died in childbirth with their second son. They say that losing his son broke Anton Cambier. I don't think he expected the boy wouldn't come home. Now, the story goes that the boy was aboard CSS Raleigh, an ironclad. He was injured very badly when that ship ran aground trying to go up a river. Had to be evacuated to hospital, where he died. So, in 1892, one of the big fever outbreaks comes through. Yellow fever was spreading all over this part of the state, and King James was one of the city's hardest hit. Cambier did what most of the old French families did, and kept his family home. Locked the gates, sent home the household staff, brought in fresh food and water on the regular, but tried to wait it out. In October, 2 months after the fever really began to hit, a stranger came into town looking for Mr. Cambier. He was a rangy, wiry man, a bit pale, according to the newspapers. Had the family look about him. Wouldn't give his name, said he was a distant relative. Said he had a legal matter to discuss with them. He told them in no uncertain terms that Anton Cambier was going to see him, and they told him that he would not. he would not receive any visitors. And let me tell you that in those days, that kind of money made sure they didn't receive any visitors. Cambieres owned this town. Somehow, though, he finally managed to convince someone to deliver a note on his behalf. So they did. Around October 17th or 18th this was. And on the 19th, Anton Cambieres sent out a simple note informing the chief constable that a young man could enter by the main gate so long as he demonstrated he wasn't ill. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with it, but they said to be careful anyway. The quarantine might be compromised, and in those days you couldn't always be certain. But old Anton insisted, sent a letter ordering the chief constable to let the boy in. So he did. Nobody stopped him when he entered the gate, left unlocked for him, and then he shut it behind him. A week passed. Cambieres hadn't come out to pick up their milk or their food deliveries for several days. The man who brought in clean water for them couldn't get anybody to answer when he buzzed at the gate. The Cambieres had a phone line, so they tried that. No answer. Sent couriers around. No answer. Finally, the constables decided to break down the gate. Figured maybe they all become sick. Figured, at best, they needed to be evacuated to an hospital. At best. What they found there? Well, they never found any bodies. Not any old bodies, anyway. I shall spare your stomach by just saying that somebody had gone crazy with an axe. Anton Cambieres, 79. Sophie, the second Mrs. Cambieres, 53. Their two daughters, Ada, 29, and Jacqueline, 22. Their granddaughter, Anne, 3. And their son-in-law, a firefighter called Isaiah, 38. 6 people. There were, we'll just say, portions of those poor souls scattered around the house. Of the mysterious visitor and the murder weapon, there was no sign. Of course, there were all kinds of questions about who did it. Natural conclusion was that the stranger did it. Lots of stories that he was the son who allegedly died in the war, somehow survived, came back to get revenge on his father for, hell, who knows what. Like I said, he never raised a hand to anyone. He was mean, he was grumpy, but he was never physical, and the loss of his son hit him hard. Some in town say that, again, allegedly, there was some sort of cursed book on site next to Mr. Cambieres, well, part of Mr. Cambieres that made it possible to identify him. Something about an endless list of names, titles, and epithets. Well, nobody knows how it got there, and it certainly doesn't appear in any estate inventories or police reports. Anyway, long and short of it is that the only surviving Cambieres in this country, the other son of that first marriage, wouldn't set foot in there. That son sold it all and moved off to cousins in France. He was never seen in this country again. He did see to it that a huge chunk of money went to a monument, though. Big one. See, if you look over the fence there, no, not there, just to the right of that stand of trees, up the small hill, yeah, there you go. The cenotaph with the pillars. Distinctive, isn't it? And beautiful. In 1949, April 11th to be specific, Josh Stein, the guide on this very tour, took a tour group in the Huguenot cemetery. It was a regular feature in those days, and customers could spend a little extra to spend time there. They went in around 10 p.m. with 10 in the group. They spent 45 minutes there, and then they came out. 5 of them, plus Stein. Only 5 people. Stein couldn't find them. Went into the cemetery looking, got a couple of the stouter fellows from the tour group to follow him in. They canvassed the place. They never found a single one of those missing people. This is a matter of record. It's not something we make up for the tour. You can look it up in the library. Do if you get a chance. It's a weird, wild story. In April of 1977, a school group was touring the cemetery, part of the Old Town After Dark Festival. There were 12 students, 2 teachers, and 3 parents. 9 of those students and 2 of the adults actually made it out. The others just didn't. They didn't show up when the time came to leave. Again, huge search, extensive. Nobody found them. Not our tour this time, but it happened, And again, all on record. So, you might wonder, where do I fit into this story? In the fall of 2014, I was volunteering on a dig in the west part of the cemetery. We were trying to locate the oldest of the burial sites. We wanted to give them proper headstones, which I'm happy to say are now either in place or will be soon. Unfortunately, that was delayed for so long because, well, we say it was taxes and the pandemic, but it was really something else. See, we've been storing some of our equipment near the Cambier monument. I'm not sure what happened, but one of the volunteers, a student I think, took the little backhoe we'd been using for a joyride down the path, and he apparently hit a hole in the base of the hill. Hit something hard and got stuck. At first we thought it was a little sinkhole, not unheard of in Florida or in a cemetery. Sweet Lord, may they rest. It was not a sinkhole. There was a chamber, overgrown with grass and hidden by a false granite panel at the base of that hill. We weren't allowed to go in. The town constables did. They didn't find much, but they found enough. Clothes, a permission slip here, somebody's backpack, a moth-eaten woman's hat, probably from the late 1940s. One of the lanterns we gave the guests to carry on our tours before cell phones were common. A pair of glasses. There were no positively identifiable human remains, or I reckon it would have been big news. But it was enough. The city kept it pretty quiet, made sure the families knew and gave them respectful burials, more ceremonial than anything else. Those missing people, look, they never left that cemetery. I don't know how, I don't know why, but they didn't. You'll find it in the September 2014 papers. Look for the headline, "Missing Floridians May Have Been Discovered." So, we don't go into that cemetery anymore. Yes, I can guess you're thinking that's one of the reasons we do the wristbands and the lanyards. And yes, that's right. You can feel free to tell the stories to your tour groups if you like. Most of them know about the missing group in 77. Some of them have heard of 49. Sensationalist books and podcasts, some of those stupid Most Haunted shows, have added a bunch of other nonsense to the story, which is unsettling enough as it is. They'll ask you about the disappearances every 10 years, or the little boy who came out 30 years later claiming he'd been kept in the Cambier vault. All of that is complete nonsense. Most of them think all of it is nonsense though, and adding that stuff certainly hasn't helped the credibility of the tellers or the honoured victims. Let's move on. Do you see the intersection here at El Rey and Charles Edward? Have a look at the map. You will see 4 markers, at least. Boss may have added more in the interim. He's adding some, taking them off all the time. Now the ones in red, your tour, remember? Okay. One of them is pretty close. Start by the streetlight ahead. There used to be an Anglican cemetery here. Small one, built in 1801. Only used for about 14 years before it was moved. There was a storm, not hurricane level, but bad enough, that got just to about the line of that streetlight. They were above ground burials, pretty standard for Florida, as you'll soon learn, and they survived. But some of the newer burials got water in them and the stones cracked. It was decided it would be safer to move them, so they were moved out of town to a cemetery called the Old Aether. You'll see it when you go in and out of the town by the western route. Nice place. One of the people buried there was a small child named Mary Ann. She died very suddenly, not long before her 5th birthday. Little Jim, remember him? Another interesting story, maybe just a coincidence, but people love stories about dogs, especially good boys like Little Jim. Little Jim would come here once a week at least, and sit not far from the streetlight. He'd just sit there, panting happily. Nobody could figure out why. He wasn't marking it. He wasn't meeting anybody in particular. But somebody put 2 and 2 together and decided that maybe, just maybe, he was there for Mary Ann. There's a note on the little tombstone that covers a burial over an old acre. It says, "She loved all of God's creatures and her dear dog Millie." Well, I doubt Millie was a Boston Terrier. A little early for those fellas. But locals like to think that little Jim could feel her, and that he went by once a week simply to say hello. The story is that Jim lingers here where she was originally buried. Of course, where in the old cemetery, nobody really knows. We did a survey here with a magnetometer, no graves left, so it's impossible to know, sadly. Now I've told you about that, of course, I'd like to talk to you about rule number 4. That has to do with stories. You see, ghost tours have a reputation. Some people take everything that's said on these tours as gospel. Others think it's all fiction. Truth is that without scientific proof of the existence of ghosts, we can't say for certain which stories are true. I think myself that the best we can do is to try to get back to the oldest, best tradition of the story. Now, some people prefer to elaborate, add new bits as time go on. They say that's part of tale-telling, part of folklore. And that approach is also valid. As a guide, you're probably wondering where you get your stories from, whether they're assigned or whether they're just sort of go out and find them yourself. Tomorrow, probably in the late afternoon, the boss is a late sleeper, you'll get an email from the office. It will be a document, a big one worth printing, with hundreds of references to local stories. Some of them are little more than notes that say, "Look this story up," or "Local tradition says." Others might be a paragraph or two at best. However, the reason that document is so long is that some of these stories are complete. You should start with some of the stories that come in that big document. Learn them. Make them your own. Try to stick close to the version the boss recommends. He prefers that. Tends to take the traditional stance that I do, but nobody's going to fire you if you add your own spin, or you find new information. And if you do, please don't be shy about it. Let the rest of us know. Also, you're welcome to do your own digging, add some new stories to the repertoire, and that's lovely. A town, a city this old has thousands of stories waiting to be heard. And when it's a town heavily inundated with Scots and Irish immigrants, well, you get the idea. But there's a thing about stories. Let's move up the road a bit. We can talk while we walk. We're looking for a small, white, stucco church. Can't miss it. So as I was saying, the thing about stories, see, the stuff about the cemetery and it having to be moved, that was all true. And yeah, little Jim has spent a lot of time near that streetlight. Absolutely true. But the rest is utter bollocks. Marianne wasn't a little girl when she died. She was young, actually. 17 years old. Still too young to be fair. And she did love animals, that much is true. Animals were the only things she did love, if Marianne had any capacity for what real love was to begin with. The truth is this. In 1807, Marianne McKinnon fell in love with a married man, a veteran of the Royal Marines called John Horton. John was wounded in service against the French, shot through the lung, and paid out. He wasn't happy about that, but he chose to use his little pension and move to the Americas. He hated the cold in his native England, and at any rate the weather was better for his injuries. He was a Catholic too, and frankly Florida was more friendly to folks of his religious persuasion. Now, John had a young wife and twin boys. Mrs. Horton, her name was Wilhelmina, interestingly enough, was very ill after the birth of their children. John was devoted to that woman and to his little boys. John was a whitesmith. That's the kind of person who polishes up silver and pewter, but they also make very pretty things out of non-precious metals. Very stylish in the 18th and early 19th centuries, you know. Make something worth very little look like something quite valuable. He had a good business here in town and spent months caring for his beloved wife. However, he was a one-man operation and he couldn't afford to keep it closed for much longer, so John had to go back to work, eventually. He hired Marianne McKinnon, who was a friend of the family, to look after Wilhelmina Horton and to take care of the kids. Marianne soon developed an obsession with him, if in fact she hadn't already been obsessed. Why? No dramatic reason. Some people just do. I can tell you that none of the historians believe that something inappropriate happened with regards to John. She would greet him at home with dinner cooked, dressed to the nines, or the equivalent for the time. She referred to the twins as her own little boys. Rumours started to spread that she wasn't taking proper care of Wilhelmina, but that Wilhelmina was too sick and too worried about frightening John away from the business she knew would keep her boys fed to say anything. At first, John ignored the rumours about her. He was, admittedly, very naive. He was too trusting, and he believed most of it was just down to gossip. But eventually he heard enough. I don't know what the precipitant was, which story it was that got to him, but he went home and confronted Marianne. Marianne confessed that she loved him and thought of the children as her own. She said she wanted to marry him. He was perhaps kinder than he should have been wiser about a young girl and her feelings, but he told her that she was confused. He told her that she was young. He understood what it was like to fall in love with somebody at that age. But he had no interest in her. He was firm. He was devoted to his wife, Wilhelmina, and devoted to his children. He had hired her to take care of the boys and to see to Wilhelmina's care and recuperation. She responded that she was still happy to do that, but only for him. She said that she knew they'd marry one day. John was deeply troubled by this. He paid her for the rest of the week and he let her go. He told her that she wasn't to come back again. This is where it gets dark. That night, Marianne snuck into the house and set it on fire. John was warned by Mary's horse, Millie. No, not a dog was Millie. An horse. Millie apparently got panicky when the fire grew and started making noise, knocking, rubbing against the wall of the room where John was sleeping. John was able to grab one of the boys before the house collapsed. The other son and poor Wilhelmina died. Probably from smoke inhalation. Thank God for small miracles.
Good girl. Good girl. Thank you.
Millie saved that family. John kept the horse and treasured her. Marianne McKinnon was found sleeping in the grass near the house the next day. When she was asked what she'd been doing, she said she'd been waiting for her husband, John, to rescue their children and to take them all to safety. She soon admitted what she'd done, told them that Wilhelmina had been an adulterer, that she was cleansing the house or some nonsense like that. She was arrested, found guilty, and sentenced to hang. Her parents pled for clemency, told the magistrate that they believed she was young and unclear in the faculties of the mind, suggested she should be transported or placed in a care facility. But the magistrate wouldn't hear of it. She had, after all, done something truly awful. Marianne, well, she beat the executioner to the drop, if you get my meaning. Poison, so far as I know. And in those days, suicides, and a few others besides, were generally forbidden church burials. So Marianne McKinnon was buried just outside the churchyard in the crossroads. Now, again, part of the original story I told you was still true. The cemetery was nearby, but Mary was just outside, near that street lamp. I think little Jim sat there because he wanted to keep the locals safe. He had a good sense for people, or that's what I'm told. Could be wrong. When the cemetery was moved, of course, Mary wasn't moved. Why would she be? She wasn't buried in the churchyard. But in 1907, they were doing work on that road, and it was decided that Mary should be reinterred over at the Aether. They found the skeleton mostly intact and clothed in the burial shroud. So they did. They moved her.
I see your eyes. I see you see where this is going. Not long after bad things started happening.
3 different kids injured themselves in different ways near this corner. Pretty serious ones too. Broken leg here, a broken arm. One poor girl cracked her skull open. All of them survived, but it was still horrifying. At least that's what the old folks used to say. Then it was the adults' turn. 2 members of the Gold family were hit by a car whilst they were crossing the street. Now in 1907, there weren't exactly a large number of cars in King James, let alone Florida. Later in that year, late July in fact, a woman who'd lived in the town all her life, a lady called Alice Green. Don't know her married name, so Alice Green she's always been to me. She was hit by an ice wagon. Now, Alice had lived in town all her life. She knew those roads. She grew up there. In fact, she grew up not very far from the intersection itself. That ice wagon always took the same route too. The mules crushed her to death. In August, a pair of twins, the only identical twins in the city, coincidentally enough, were attacked by a wild cat from the swamp nearby. No idea how it got into town. They were the Robertson twins, Gilbert and Stanley. You can see photos in the City Museum. 18 years old at the time. Gilbert Robertson lost his left eye, but he went on to play minor league baseball. Pretty good, as I understand. Stanley lost a leg, later died from his injuries. That was too much. People began to think there was some kind of curse. They had a local priest, Father Annan, perform a blessing on that spot. And then he gave some very strange instructions. See, are you familiar with metaphysics? Maybe you've heard of Tulpa theory or consensus reality. It's referenced a lot in fiction, especially science fiction, but it's a belief legitimately held by some. You see, it says that if enough people believe in something, odds are that things will become true. That's allegedly how we got some gods, or how myths became reality. Examples. If enough people believe that Bigfoot is a thing, over time, space, Bigfoot may actually become a thing. There's enough people who believe in him to actually cause him to manifest in our reality. That's the theory, anyway. The ancient Egyptians had a similar idea. Stop saying somebody's name, and that person ceases to exist. I don't know about any of that, but I do know this. Father Annan's instructions were very firmly believed. Forget the original story of Mary. Stop telling stories about people getting hurt, hauntings, bad luck at the corner. When someone shares or publishes that story, you laugh at them, or you tell them that isn't the real truth of what happened. It's a local myth. Some tourists made it up, something like that. You see, the idea was along those same lines as Tulpa theory. Couldn't exactly change the tragedy that had happened, but we could minimize the damage. Enough people start saying that the old stories about people getting hurt and bad luck at the corner are just myth, and suddenly they stop having the effect they used to have. It worked too. Fewer people got hurt every year. It's been decades since anyone's had a serious accident or a run-in as a result of being around this corner, and I think Father Annan's instructions had something to do with that. So sometimes, despite our fidelity to the original source material, as you might say, we have to tell the wrong story. Because the right one carries too much baggage, you might say. You can believe it or you can't. But I've seen things, and I've felt things, and I figure if that's the company policy, I am absolutely not going to fight it. Why would I? It would only bring up a tragedy. The only remaining evidence of that tragedy is over at St. Alex's, little altar and a memorial stone. Only ashes and bones remained, you see. So, rule number 4. If the company tells you to tell a specific version of a story, in great detail, you tell that story. Even if it's complete nonsense, right? Okay. Yeah, that was a long one and I'm perhaps too passionate about it. Let's move on. If I'm honest with you, I'm feeling a bit out of sorts. Keep an eye out for the white stucco church, like I say. It's a bit overgrown, so it might take us a minute to... And here we go. Welcome to St. James Church. This is the oldest religious structure still standing in King James. It was built in 1709, replaced the little Spanish church, Holy Trinity, that was unfortunately destroyed in a hurricane in 1704. It's a remarkable little church, isn't it? Very typical of the period. Used to be twice as big. There's a story to that, and unfortunately, brings us to another rule. Rule number 5. Now, I'm going to have to ask you a personal question. It's nothing about your love life, I promise, but it's important. I know this is a very strange thing to ask you, especially with us just having formally met tonight, but do you believe in God? I know your dad was one of those believed in God but no organized religion types of fellas. Or really, are you of any religious persuasion? Methodist, Catholic, Hindu, Jewish, Druze, Muslim? Really, anything counts. Quaker? Not many Quakers in this part of the state, mate. That's fascinating, if you don't mind my saying. Glad to have you. Good folks, the Quakers. That's good, because you can go into the church with no incident. If you look at the map, you'll see you have 3 different points of interest marked there. The churchyard, the altar, and a space in the back. Most of the folks in the churchyard were moved to the new Catholic church, St. Alexander, St. Alex, when it was built in 1765. The ones they could find, anyway. There are some interesting stories connected to that. There's a priest who was allegedly murdered near the altar by a jealous husband who mistook him for his older brother. Not sure if that one's true, but it's a fantastic story, isn't it? And it's so weird that you almost want to believe it. The space in the back is where the old rectory, the priest's residence, was. There was no fort here during the Spanish period, only a stockade, and when the British attacked the area in 1760 and again in 1763, the local garrison fortified the rectory and fought. They fought like lions, as far as the stories go. And of course, there are ghost stories attached to that too. Rule number 5 is simple but very harsh, almost draconian. Please don't take it the wrong way. It's not meant to be prejudicial, even though it certainly sounds like it is. Non-believers should not be allowed to go into St. James Church. Legally, we can't stop them. We can't say, "Hey, you're an atheist, you awful heretic. Keep out." But for safety reasons, we have to try. In 1763, the same year the British took Florida, there was a raid. Royal Marines, not my outfit, on the town. The Spanish garrison was drawn down somewhat. The 7 Years' War was ending and the Spanish were hurting badly. Nevertheless, as I said, they fought well. The commanding officer of that British raiding force compelled their surrender, took them off to a prison camp. I don't know what happened to them, but that's not necessarily germane to the story. The true story happens after they take the town. This British commander, one of those real bastards who fought under Bloody Bill against the Scots during the 45, he wanted to teach those filthy curs a lesson, especially for resisting. There was more than one red-haired, green-eyed soldier in that garrison, you see, and he let his men sack and loot the church. Now, they didn't burn it down, but some idiot soldier got drunk, let a watchfire go out of control near the old Spanish ammunition dump, and big explosion. Nobody killed, but it effectively wiped out a third of the church building. Now, this tour, as you may have noticed, is named for a man called Colonel Gregory. Colonel Gregory was in fact a Scots Presbyterian. He came to Florida in 1764 and was given command over the British troops in our area. He was interested to see the city and came by on an informal visit with some of his men whilst they were looking at potential defense of the area in case the Spanish got antsy. There were already rumors of another war in Europe. That's when he saw the church. He asked the locals what had happened, and they told him. He was furious. Now remember, Colonel Gregory was no Catholic, and this wasn't long after the last major Jacobite rising. He was a Protestant. Apparently very Protestant, strict, church-going Presbyterian. But he wasn't a bigot. He had no problem with Catholics, merely doctrinal issues. In fact, he was very fond of the ones he'd known. He was one of those generations of Scots who came to adulthood after most of traditional Highland culture had been obliterated, and I think he was saddened by that. Colonel Gregory was angry, and he was ashamed that the Royal Marines had done such a thing. Couldn't find the man responsible, of course, so he couldn't call for his punishment, but he could do something to make up for it. So he donated a significant portion of money, he was apparently the younger son of a lord, and had a new church built in consultation with the locals. A lot of the locals helped to build it. Protestants, Catholics, Jews. That church was named Saint Alexander in his honor. One of the Saint Alexanders, there are a lot of them, is often seen as a patron of soldiers. Colonel Gregory was so impressed that he apparently named his first son Alexander when he was born a few months later. That new church was built, and the ground was consecrated, and there was a big feast. Happy times. But when they were moving the folks from a cemetery, stories started to circulate about ghosts and goblins. It was the typical sort of stuff, you know. Vengeful spirits angry after being moved, or angry for being forgotten. But the thing is, whether or not those stories were true, since that time we've had weird incidents at St. James. People come out with their skin scratched. They feel their hair being pulled. In the 1970s, 2 ladies in their 50s came out with second-degree burns. Nobody knows how they got them. Not too long ago, they found an older fella dead in the cemetery. Migrant worker, very much loved and respected here. Knew him well. Healthy for his age. No apparent cause of death. There were rumors he was frightened to death, but everybody says that when they want to make something more tragic and supernatural sounding than it actually is in a case like that. One thing all these people have had in common, every one of them so far as we know, is that all of them were atheists. The 2 ladies were atheists for sure. They were interviewed about their experience. That migrant fellow, Gustavo, certainly was. He was private about it, but he was. So please, if you can, keep the non-believers out of the church and out of the churchyard. I can't explain why it happens, it just does. And I've seen it enough to believe there's something to it. If you have to, make something up. Last Tuesday I skipped the church entirely. I usually take a friendly poll of the group, pass it off as an excuse to tell the story. But there were 3 atheists and a woman who identified as an agnostic. Close enough in that case. I told them we weren't allowed to go into the church that night because of a potential snake problem. It worked. Anything you can do to keep yourself and your tour group safe, that's a good thing. Even if it needs a little white lie now and then. Let's move on. Here we go. The Spanish Quarter, not the famous one, our Spanish Quarter, is up ahead. It's a really interesting place, I think. It's one of the most popular parts of town with tourists. It's not really so much Spanish as it is 18th century. The first Scots-Irish to come here built their homes in the area. Mostly because the few Spanish settlers were concentrated there, and I suppose they feel safer. The buildings all sort of sprung from there. Although most of the Spanish families moved on, the Scots, the Irish, the English Jacobites all stayed there. Eventually the French moved in too. As you can see, the architecture is truly amazing. There's the pig-faced helm, the one I told you about, exceptionally good pub food. Take that from a Brit who doesn't much care for American attempts to do pub food. Right next door, there's a very solid Chinese place, Sunhua. There's a great old bookstore there, currently called Miller's. That's been a bookstore there since 1812. There's a smithy, mostly to educate tourists and kids. The smithy is built in front of an old yard and a warehouse full of shops. The warehouse used to be an ice house, and that's where the ice wagons would pick up the blocks for delivery. Remember the ice wagons that hit that poor lady? Came from that place. And the land the warehouse was built on? Coincidentally enough, that's where John Orton had his whitesmithing shop. There's the usual tourist stuff, candle maker, some new age shops, a store that specializes in refurbished arcade machines. Fun place that. Lots of opportunities to go in and try the machines. Now, up ahead. You see that monument? The statue? Let's stop there. I can tell you about rule number 6. Last one, I promise. This statue you see is, yes, Colonel Gregory. It's based on a portrait they managed to find in England from around 1770-something. Before the revolution, anyway. So it's quite true to his appearance, apparently. But it's somewhat new. If you come here before it was put up in 1992, you would have seen a different statue. That statue was a chap called Captain Christopher Bennett, a local who served with the Confederacy. One of the few locals who did so, actually. This was mostly a Unionist town. Bennett was a very famous artillery officer, something of a hero in the Confederacy. Unfortunately, he was also an unapologetic slave owner, and as times changed, people realized what a shit he actually was. Seems he had something to do with the Klan in its early days here in Florida too. So, yeah, fun guy, had to go. Statue wasn't even historical. It was put up in the 1960s to scare the civil rights marchers off. Most of them actually were. That too is true. You can look it up. Now, before that, it was basically an open area with a flower garden. In the 18th century, during the Spanish period, it had a rather more sinister purpose. It was used for public executions, mostly by garrote. A very unpleasant way to go, I'll tell you. So, we have a number of stories about ghosts and hauntings related to the spot. It seems at least one pirate was executed here, which of course makes the pirate fanatics go crazy and means that now, apparently everyone who was executed here was either a pirate, or secretly a pirate, or married to a pirate, or aiding a pirate, or... There's a lot more nuance than that, bleeding Jack Sparrow fanboys. There was only one proven pirate executed here. Some legitimately bad people, some poor bastards who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. At least 3 escaped slaves accused of violence against their masters. One woman in her 30s accused of witchcraft. Ah, yes, the alleged witch. Bait for tourists everywhere. Don't get me started on her. It's a sore point. A sore point I have with all self-educated types. She was not a witch. She'd pissed off some Spanish landowner and was done away with on flimsy evidence at best. In fact, the priest who helped arrange her execution was recalled by the church, so bad that scandal was. As well, it should have been. Even then, I think it only became a scandal because she was, apparently, the illegitimate daughter of a very important person in Spain who still kept tabs on his daughter. Now, the modern witchcraft crowd love the story. They think of her as a martyr. They don't want to believe it when you tell them she wasn't a witch, had nothing to do with anything even remotely related, wasn't even apparently into herbalism, just happened to be an unfortunate victim of a corrupt system. That doesn't stop them spreading stories of hauntings, witchy curses, that sort of thing. I don't know if I believe in magic or witchcraft or whatever, but I can guarantee that if you get it from one of the New Age shops here in town, there's a very good chance it's complete nonsense. I will tell you this much. I feel it's a disservice that all these poor people executed for witchcraft have gone from innocent people abused by a terrible system to, oh, she really was a witch. She really was a good witch, though. Doesn't that just reinforce a lie? No doubt some of these people might have identified as such, but no proof. And the overwhelming majority denied it to the end, except under torture. How fair is it to them? Not very, I reckon. Getting back on point, the spot is popular. It's so popular that it's very easy for people to blend in with the group, which is another reason we use those purple wristbands and lanyards. Makes sense, right? Don't want any freeloaders screwing it up for the rest of us. And whilst the boss is fine with people listening to our stories, he rightly doesn't feel they should be shadowing our tours the whole time, taking advantage of our expertise for nothing. No, there's another rule here too, and it's important. You ever been on other ghost tours? Of course you have. Yes, I've done that one in St. Augustine too. Can you think of something they do different? Something different from the way I'm presenting this stuff to you, for example? No? Well, they often treat it like a living history experience. Yes, the clothes they wear are often a dead giveaway. Some of them dress as famous Floridians, or they dress as people allegedly buried in the cemetery, maybe famous criminals. There's a trend all over the world for this kind of business, and it makes money. There's an over-the-top Victorian reenactor, a highly successful tour guide over in London, who does a Jack the Ripper tour dressed in stereotypical red cape and top hat. Medical bag too. Bloke's a millionaire at this point. Utterly disrespectful to the victims, if you ask me, and to the people of the East End, but the man made money hand over fist for years. Our company? We don't do anything like that. So, rule number 6. We don't have living historians. Further, no people in historical costume work for us. nor are they permitted to take these tours. We do not dress up. We do not pretend to be the dead or the victims of any tragedy or the characters in any local story. We've never done that. The boss feels it's disrespectful. I think he learned that from his great-grandmother. Welsh by birth, old school. Yes, old Aggie herself. Very, very superstitious. Yeah, so nobody in our group wears historical costumes on the clock. We don't promote using reenactors. We don't let our guests dress up either. Standard rule of thumb. If they come dressed up in some sort of period garb, at least dating before the 20th century, I know some folks are really into old-fashioned clothing. Again, turn them away. Politely. Tell them that you do it out of respect for the families of the deceased. Tell them it's too easy to confuse them with memories of the living history groups who work here in the Spanish Quarter. There'll always be some near the blacksmith, if nothing else. Hell, if it makes you feel any better, the ones who do it rarely dress correctly for their role anyway. My first night working as a guide without a supervisor, I had 14 people in my group. Big group. 2 of them came in costume. We didn't enforce the purple wristbands yet, but we were using purple ribbons. I asked folks who were going on the tours to wear them. These folks, there were a couple in late 18th century garb. He had a tricorn with a purple ribbon tied around it. She had a lovely dress, low cut with a purple ribbon around the neck. Very French Revolution chic. They lost their tickets, but their names were on the list and they had the ribbons. I was young, much more naive than I am now, and I let them join us. They were odd sorts. Smiled and nodded enthusiastically. Didn't ask any questions. Didn't talk too much to the other patrons. In those days, we used to do a thing for the late tours. As the final stop for the evening, we'd stop in for a drink at the Haggis and Palm, which later became the Pig Face Helmet. So it was essentially an adults-only tour. Anyhow, we stopped at the tour, had a drink, and then everyone came out. I gave them a spiel, little story about the only pirate we confirm who was actually executed here. Very terrible pirate called Barnard Freyholt, incidentally. Dutchman, terrible sailor, terrible salesman, worst pirate. And when that was done, I took an head count. I had 10. The 2 in the period garb were nowhere to be seen, but I was missing 2 more. I went over those names over a dozen times, kid. I checked them. I called out their names to make sure, but they were gone. Poof. I'd assumed that maybe they'd stayed for a late night drink and decided to skip the final story. One of those missing people was a guy called Aether out of New York. Friendly fella. Asked a lot of very interesting questions. I think he had an eye for the lady in the period dress. Don't know if she ever noticed him. This was the first time I lost anybody on a tour. I was beside myself. Now, Aether had a used credit card, and the credit card was declined. Not a big deal. We called him at his hotel room trying to work it out. No answer. Tried several times with his home in New York. No answer. In fact, we never heard back from him. Turns out that Mr. Aether was reported missing about 3 months later. He was a single man, not many family, but he never returned home. Neighbours couldn't figure out where he'd gone. School teacher, very popular one, and the year started with him not showing up for the first day of the year. Nothing. The other, I couldn't tell you. Don't know what happened to her. Maybe she went home. I hope she went home. Remember, none of this company's employees wear that stuff. Did I mention the other 2 missing were the ones in the period costumes? Something happened recently. You're going to hear about it eventually. Might as well hear it from me. 3 weeks ago, I was walking home around 1 a.m. on the 7th. Found a tour group looking a little baffled near the old MacLear place. One of the stops on the carriage tour. They had no idea where they were. All of them had the purple wristbands. I asked them who they'd been touring with. They said they'd been touring with Philip. But he'd met them at the usual place for this tour. So, not far from the statue of Little Jim, and he led them that way. So yeah, 2 problems with this. First, that tour starts 5 miles north of where we do. It's a long walk from our start point to their start point. It's quite a long excursion to do owing to the terrain it covers. That's one of the reasons for the carriage. So, going all the way from Little Jim to the McLear place is very odd. The second one is this. We do not have a Philip working for this company. I've worked for this company for, well, longer than you'd believe. And I've known only 2 Philips who worked for it in all that time. One of them, unfortunately, died of cancer in the early 1980s. The other quit when he finished university. I think he's a dentist in New Jersey now, and has been since the late 90s. Neither of them was anywhere near Florida when those people toured 3 weeks ago. They said he was medium build, very realistic looking grey periwig, knee breeches, an embroidered coat, and a blue hat, one he carried under his arm. Looked to be Caucasian, blue eyes, no facial hair, scar across the bridge of the nose, eye-collared shirt, spoke with an English accent. One of the men in the tour group, Florida native, asked him how he could tolerate the high-collared shirt in the heat, so the group remembered that detail very well. Me, I think I'd remember another guy with an accent similar to mine. The cops thought he might have been running a scam. Town constables went looking for him. Didn't find him, and nobody's seen him since. I do not know who Philip was, but I don't think Philip was supposed to be here, and I fear what Philip would have done. Strange story about that too, but look, I don't want to make myself sound like a crazy person, and it's late so we can... What's that? Okay, it's not much really. They said Philip wanted to take them into the McLear place. Now, we don't go into the McLear place. It's not structurally sound. City plans to restore it keep getting pushed back, but we don't go into it in the meanwhile. They say he opened the gate to let them in. And then, they heard a dog barking. They say it then. Philip looked nervous and said he'd be back in a moment, needed to look into the matter. And he never came back. That's all in a police report. So, this bloke tried to take them into a place we explicitly forbid our guides from entering. Almost had them in. And then, he was distracted by the barking of a dog none of them ever saw. I like to think it was Little Jim. That, as they say, is it. Those are the 6 rules. Follow them and you'll be just fine. Don't follow them, well, look. If you don't end up getting hurt or lost, or getting your customers hurt or lost, then thank your lucky stars. And if the boss finds out you broke it anyway, well, you'll be out of a job. And it's a good job. Here they are again. Remember them. Don't mean to be a broken record, but it's important as a military man, I assure you, that remembering the bloody rules is important, even if they make no sense. Number 1, we don't do tour buses. Number 2, we don't go into the Huguenot cemetery. Number 3, everyone on the tour must wear a purple wristband or lanyard. Number 4, if the company explicitly instructs you to tell one version of a story, tell it, even if you think it's nonsense. Number 5, non-believers really shouldn't go into St. James. Number 6, we don't use living historians or reenactors, and we don't allow people to wear costumes on our tours. And if you have an aunt, always remember to give Little Jim a gentle pat and a hello. You never know what it will help, and it doesn't hurt a thing. Got it? Good. You'll do fine then. Oh, you must be hungry. Let me buy you dinner. I'll tell you some of my favourite stories, and why I think I actually do believe in ghosts. What's that? What happened to John Orton? Interesting guy, right? Well, he stayed in town, if you believe it. Millie the horse's ashes are interred at St. Alexander, if you can believe that. When his surviving son died, old age, thankfully, he had the urn holding Millie's ashes buried with him. He always said that Millie had saved them. So did John. Like I said, they loved that horse. John, well, when his son moved out of the house and got married, John took out a boat one evening, said he was looking for something, and he never came back. I like to think he went peacefully, and I like to think he never really left. He truly loved it here.
Have faith. We know.
29, 36, 70, 11.
Tonight's broadcast was provided as a public service by the Society of Virtuous Pagans. You can reach us with questions, comments, ideas, and stories you would like us to share at societyofvirtuouspagans@gmail.com. Audio engineering for tonight's episode was provided by Creative Minds Audio. Our logo was developed by Mazface. The Helios Radio was developed by cast member Kieran Byrne. Thank you for listening, as always. If you'd like to continue to support our broadcasts for the public good, please consider liking and subscribing, or subscribing and downloading on your favorite podcast platform. All material contained within this broadcast and associated media has been treated with the Nagoya mimetic.
Broadcast ends.